Complete Works of Swami Vivekananda, by Swami Vivekananda. Volume 2, Practical Vedanta and Other Lectures. Cosmology. There are two worlds, the microcosm, and the macrocosm, the internal and the external. We get truth from both of these by means of experience. The truth gathered from internal experience is psychology, metaphysics, and religion. From external experience, the physical sciences. Now a perfect truth should be in harmony with experiences in both these worlds. The microcosm must bear testimony to the macrocosm, and the macrocosm to the microcosm. Physical truth must have its counterpart in the internal world, and the internal world must have its verification outside. Yet, as a rule, we find that many of these truths are in conflict. At one period of the world's history, the internals become supreme, and they begin to fight the externals. At the present time the externals, the physicists, have become supreme, and they have put down many claims of psychologists and metaphysicians. So far as my knowledge goes, I find that the real, essential parts of psychology are in perfect accord with the essential parts of modern physical knowledge. It is not given to one individual to be great in every respect. It is not given to one race or nation to be equally strong in the research of all fields of knowledge. The modern European nations are very strong in their research of external physical knowledge, but they are not so strong in their study of the inner nature of man. On the other hand, the Orientals have not been very strong in their researches of the external physical world, but very strong in their researches of the internal. Therefore we find that Oriental physics and other sciences are not in accordance with Occidental sciences, nor is Occidental psychology in harmony with Oriental psychology. The Oriental physicists have been routed by Occidental scientists. At the same time, each claims to rest on truth, and as we stated before, real truth in any field of knowledge will not contradict itself. The truths internal are in harmony with the truths external. We all know the theories of the cosmos according to the modern astronomers and physicists, and at the same time we all know how woefully they undermine the theology of Europe, how these scientific discoveries that are made act as a bomb thrown at its stronghold, and we know how theologians have in all times attempted to put down these researches. I want here to go over the psychological ideas of the Orientals about cosmology and all that pertains to it, and you will find how wonderfully they are in accordance with the latest discoveries of modern science, and where there is disharmony, you will find that it is modern science which lacks and not they. We all use the word nature. The old Sankhya philosophers called it by two different names, Prakriti, which is very much the same as the word nature, and the more scientific name, Avyakta, undifferentiated, from which everything proceeds, such as atoms, molecules, and forces, mind, thought, and intelligence. It is startling to find that the philosophers and metaphysicians of India stated ages ago that mind is material. What are our present materialists trying to do, but to show that mind is as much a product of nature as the body? And so is thought, and, we shall find by and by, intelligence also, all issue from that nature which is called Avyakta, the undifferentiated. The Sankhyas define it as the equilibrium of three forces, one of which is called Sattva, another Rajas, and the third Tamas. Tamas, the lowest force, is that of attraction, a little higher is Rajas, that of repulsion, and the highest is the balance of these two, Sattva, so that when these two forces, attraction and repulsion, are held in perfect control by the Sattva there is no creation, no movement in the world. As soon as this equilibrium is lost, the balance is disturbed, and one of these forces gets stronger than the other, motion sets in, and creation begins. This state of things goes on cyclically, periodically. That is to say, there is a period of disturbance of the balance, when forces begin to combine and recombine, and things project outwards. At the same time, everything has a tendency to go back to the primal state of equilibrium, and the time comes when that total annihilation of all manifestation is reached. Again, after a period, the whole thing is disturbed, projected outwards, and again it slowly goes down, like waves. All motion, everything in this universe, can be likened to waves undergoing successive rise and fall. Some of these philosophers hold that the whole universe quiets down for a period. Others hold that this quieting down applies only to systems, that is to say, that while our system here, this solar system, will quiet down and go back into the undifferentiated state, millions of other systems will go the other way, and will project outwards. I should rather favor the second opinion, that this quieting down is not simultaneous over the whole of the universe, and that in different parts different things go on. But the principle remains the same, that all we see, that is, nature herself, is progressing in successive rises and falls. The one stage, falling down, going back to balance, the perfect equilibrium, is called pralaya, the end of a cycle. The projection and the pralaya of the universe have been compared by theistical writers in India to the outbreathing and inbreathing of God. God, as it were, breathes out the universe, and it comes into him again. When it quiets down, what becomes of the universe? It exists, only in finer forms, in the form of cause, as it is called in the Sankhya philosophy. It does not get rid of causation, time, and space. They are there, only it comes to very fine and minute forms. Supposing that this whole universe begins to shrink, till every one of us becomes just a little molecule, we should not feel the change at all, because everything relating to us would be shrinking at the same time. The whole thing goes down, and again projects out, the cause brings out the effect, and so it goes on. What we call matter in modern times was called by the ancient psychologists bhutas, the external elements. There is one element which, according to them, is eternal. Every other element is produced out of this one. It is called akasha. It is somewhat similar to the idea of ether of the moderns, though not exactly similar. Along with this element, there is the primal energy called prana. Prana and akasha combine and recombine and form the elements out of them. Then at the end of the kalpa, everything subsides, and goes back to akasha and prana. There is in the Rig Veda, the oldest human writing in existence, a beautiful passage describing creation, and it is most poetical. When there was neither aught nor naught, when darkness was rolling over darkness, what existed? And the answer is given, it then existed without vibration. This prana existed then, but there was no motion in it. Anidavatam means existed without vibration. Vibration had stopped. Then when the kalpa begins, after an immense interval, the anidavatam, unvibrating atom, commences to vibrate, and blow after blow is given by prana to akasha. The atoms become condensed, and as they are condensed different elements are formed. We generally find these things very curiously translated. People do not go to the philosophers or the commentators for their translation, and have not the brains to understand them themselves. A silly man reads 3 letters of Sanskrit and translates a whole book. They translate their elements as air, fire, and so on. If they would go to the commentators, they would find they do not mean air or anything of the sort. The akasha, acted upon by the repeated blows of prana, produces vayu or vibrations. This vayu vibrates, and the vibrations growing more and more rapid result in friction giving rise to heat, tejas. Then this heat ends in liquefaction, apa. Then that liquid becomes solid. We had ether, and motion. Then came heat. Then it became liquefied, and then it condensed into gross matter, and it goes back in exactly the reverse way. The solid will be liquefied and will then be converted into a mass of heat, and that will slowly get back into motion. That motion will stop, and this kalpa will be destroyed. Then, again it will come back and again dissolve into ether. Prana cannot work alone without the help of akasha. All that we know in the form of motion, vibration, or thought is a modification of the prana, and everything that we know in the shape of matter, either as form or as resistance, is a modification of the akasha. The prana cannot live alone, or act without a medium. When it is pure prana, it has the akasha itself to live in, and when it changes into forces of nature, say gravitation, or centrifugal force, it must have matter. You have never seen force without matter or matter without force? What we call force and matter are simply the gross manifestations of these same things, which, when superfine, are called prana and akasha. Prana you can call in English life, the vital force, but you must not restrict it to the life of man. At the same time you must not identify it with spirit, Atman. So this goes on. Creation cannot have either a beginning or an end. It is an eternal ongoing. We shall state another position of these old psychologists, which is that all gross things are the results of fine ones. Everything that is gross is composed of fine things, which they call the tanmatras, the fine particles. I smell a flower. To smell, something must come in contact with my nose. The flower is there, but I do not see it move towards me. That which comes from the flower and in contact with my nose is called the tanmatra, fine molecules of that flower. So with heat, light and everything. These tanmatras can again be subdivided into atoms. Different philosophers have different theories, and we know these are only theories. It is sufficient for our purpose to know that everything gross is composed of things that are very, very fine. We first get the gross elements which we feel externally, and then come the fine elements with which the nose, eyes, and ears come in contact. Ether waves touch my eyes, I cannot see them. Yet I know they must come in contact with my eyes before I can see light. Here are the eyes, but the eyes do not see. Take away the brain center, the eyes will still be there, as also the picture of the outside world complete on the retinae, yet the eyes will not see. So the eyes are only a secondary instrument, not the organ of vision. The organ of vision is the nerve center in the brain. Likewise the nose is an instrument, and there is an organ behind it. The senses are simply the external instruments. It may be said that these different organs, indriyas, as they are called in Sanskrit, are the real seats of perception. It is necessary for the mind to be joined to an organ to perceive. It is a common experience that we do not hear the clock strike when we happen to be buried in study. Why? The ear was there. The sound was carried through it to the brain, yet it was not heard, because the mind did not attach itself to the organ of hearing. There is a different organ for each different instrument. For, if one served for all, we should find that when the mind joined itself to it, all the senses would be equally active. But it is not so, as we have seen from the instance of the clock. If there was only one organ for all the instruments, the mind would see and hear at the same time, would see and hear and smell at the same time, and it would be impossible for it not to do all these at one and the same time. Therefore it is necessary that there should be a separate organ for each sense. This has been borne out by modern physiology. It is certainly possible for us to hear and see at the same time, but that is because the mind attaches itself partially to the two centers. What are the organs made of? We see that the instruments, eyes, nose, and ears, are made of gross materials. The organs are also made of matter. Just as the body is composed of gross materials, and manufactures prana into different gross forces, so the organs are composed of the fine elements, akasha, vayu, tejas, etc., and manufacture prana into the finer forces of perception. The organs, the prana functions, the mind and the body combined, are called the finer body of man, the linga or sukshma sharira. The linga sharira has a real form because everything material must have a form. The mind is called the manas, the chitta in vritti or vibrating, the unsettled state. If you throw a stone in a lake, first there will be vibration, and then resistance. For a moment the water will vibrate and then it will react on the stone. So when any impression comes on the chitta, it first vibrates a little. That is called the manas. The mind carries the impression farther in, and presents it to the determinative faculty, buddhi, which reacts. Behind buddhi is ahamkara, egoism, the self-consciousness which says, I am. Behind ahamkara is mahat, intelligence, the highest form of nature's existence. Each one is the effect of the succeeding one. In the case of the lake, every blow that comes to it is from the external world, while in the case of the mind, the blow may come either from the external or the internal world. Behind the intelligence is the self of man, the Purusha, the Atman, the pure, the perfect, who alone is the seer, and for whom is all this change. Man looks on all these changes, he himself is never impure, but through what the Vedantists call adhyasa, by reflection, by implication, he seems to be impure. It is like the appearance of a crystal when a red or a blue flower is brought before it, the color is reflected on it, but the crystal itself is pure. We shall take it for granted that there are many selves, and each self is pure and perfect. Various kinds of gross and fine matter superimpose themselves on the self and make it multicolored. Why does nature do all this? Nature is undergoing all these changes for the development of the soul. All this creation is for the benefit of the soul, so that it may be free. This immense book which we call the universe is stretched out before man so that he may read, and he discovers eventually that he is an omniscient and omnipotent being. I must here tell you that some of our best psychologists do not believe in God in the sense in which you believe in him. The father of our psychology, Kepler, denies the existence of God. His idea is that a personal God is quite unnecessary, nature itself is sufficient to work out the whole of creation. What is called the design theory, he knocked on the head, and said that a more childish theory was never advanced. But he admits a peculiar kind of God. He says we are all struggling to get free, and when we become free, we can, as it were, melt away into nature, only to come out at the beginning of the next cycle and be its ruler. We come out omniscient and omnipotent beings. In that sense we can be called gods. You and I and the humblest beings can be gods in different cycles. He says such a God will be temporal, but an eternal God, eternally omnipotent and ruler of the universe cannot be. If there was such a God, there would be this difficulty: he must be either a bound spirit or a free one. A God who is perfectly free would not create, there is no necessity for it. If he were bound, he would not create, because he could not, he would be powerless. In either case, there cannot be any omniscient or omnipotent eternal ruler. In our scriptures, wherever the word God is mentioned, he says, it means those human beings who have become free. Kepler does not believe in the unity of all souls. His analysis, so far as it goes, is simply marvelous. He is the father of Indian thinkers. Buddhism and other systems are the outcome of his thought. According to his psychology, all souls can regain their freedom and their natural rights, which are omnipotence and omniscience. But the question arises, where is this bondage? Kepler says it is without beginning. But if it is without beginning, it must be without end, and we shall never be free. He says that though bondage is without beginning, it is not of that constant uniform character as the soul is. In other words, nature, the cause of bondage, is without beginning and end, but not in the same sense as soul, because nature has no individuality. It is like a river which gets a fresh body of water every moment. The sum total of these bodies of water is the river, but the river is not a constant quantity. Everything in nature is constantly changing, but the soul never changes. So, as nature is always changing, it is possible for the soul to come out of its bondage. The whole of the universe is built upon the same plan as a part of it. So, just as I have a mind, there is a cosmic mind. As in the individual, so in the universal. There is the universal gross body. Behind that, a universal fine body. Behind that, a universal mind. Behind that, a universal egoism, or consciousness, and behind that, a universal intelligence. And all this is in nature, the manifestation of nature, not outside of it. We have the gross bodies from our parents, as also our consciousness. Strict heredity says my body is a part of my parents' bodies, the material of my consciousness, and egoism is a part of my parents. We can add to the little portion inherited from our parents by drawing upon the universal consciousness. There is an infinite storehouse of intelligence out of which we draw what we require. There is an infinite storehouse of mental force in the universe out of which we are drawing eternally. But the seed must come from the parents. Our theory is heredity coupled with reincarnation. By the law of heredity, the reincarnating soul receives from parents the material out of which to manufacture a man. Some of the European philosophers have asserted that this world exists because I exist, and if I do not exist, the world will not exist. Sometimes it is stated thus: if all the people in the world were to die, and there were no more human beings, and no animals with powers of perception and intelligence, all these manifestations would disappear. But these European philosophers do not know the psychology of it. Although they know the principle, modern philosophy has got only a glimpse of it. This becomes easy of understanding when looked at from the Sankhya point of view. According to Sankhya, it is impossible for anything to be, which is not as its material, some portion of my mind. I do not know this table as it is. An impression from it comes to the eyes, then to the Indraya, and then to the mind, and the mind reacts, and that reaction is what I call the table. It is just the same as throwing a stone in a lake. The lake throws a wave towards the stone. This wave is what we know. What is external nobody knows. When I try to know it, it has to become that material which I furnish. I, with my own mind, have furnished the material for my eyes. There is something which is outside, which is only the occasion, the suggestion, and upon that suggestion I project my mind, and it takes the form that I see. How do we all see the same things? Because we all have similar parts of the cosmic mind. Those who have like minds will see like things, and those who have not will not see alike.